Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Have History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder. And last time, the Confederates began their attacks against the Union-held position of Winfield Scott Hancock around Reams Station. Now they launch a massive assault against the Federal line. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. At 5 p.m. on August 25th, William Pegram's 17 artillery pieces let loose a barrage of case shot and shell into the blue lines. Distinct among the rebel guns was a Whitworth gun. The man who hears the scream of a Whitworth shell will never forget the sound to the day of his death. It is a concentration of the war whoop of an Indian, the snarl of a tiger, and the scream of a woman in mortal terror. It begins afar off with a muttered threat of vengeance. It grows upon the ear with a howl as of wolves in pursuit of the lone traveler. It comes nearer with shrieks of baffled rage. It is at hand with a scream which can be likened to nothing but the cries of a mob mad for death and destruction. After about 15 minutes of the artillery doing their work, the brigades of James Connor and John R. Cook stepped off toward the enemy. They held their fire, wanting to get close before exchanging volleys. The North Carolinians closed in on the Federal works, and some hand-to-hand fighting broke out. William McRae could hear the battle raging and knew that Connor and Cook were drawing the enemy's fire and it was his time to go in. He declared to his men, "Every man must yell as if he were a division in himself. Dash for the enemy's works and not fire until there." The right two regiments of Cook's line failed to go forward when the rest of the brigade did, but when McRae marched toward the enemy, those two regiments joined them, encountering the enemy first. Artillery fire devastated the two regiments and many were pushed back, but McRae's brigade pushed those men onward and gained a lodgment on the enemy position. The Union line was beginning to crumble as new recruits, unused to combat, began to run for their lives. McRae pushed his men southward and started to roll up the Federal regiments, but got stopped by a resurgence of Union resistance. To the north, troops under Connor and Cook had been stopped and were about to surrender when they heard and saw McRae's progress. Connor reformed his men and knocked another hole in the Union line. Levin Crandall's brigade was in a desperate situation. Both its right and left flank had caved in, and now the Confederates were working their way into the Union rear. Many of Crandall's brigade surrendered to the overwhelming gray tide. The heavy smoke obscured the battlefield, and Henry Heath and Cadmus Wilcox couldn't tell what was going on, but assumed the attack had failed. They sent a courier into the fray to see what was happening, and word came back that the attack had been a huge success, with prisoners headed their way. Wilcox rode off to see for himself, and Heath ordered in David Weisiger's brigade, part of Samuel McGowan's brigade, and Joseph King's brigade. King's troops were formerly under John C.C. Sanders, who was killed a few days before at the Battle of Globe Tavern. Inside the Union fortifications was pure chaos. I at once shouted to the men, "Fire and get out quick," and suited the action to the command by setting such an example of racing and hurdle jumping as would have secured an engagement in a Wild West show. I escaped with 6 bullet holes through my clothing, but not a scratch except as made by brush and briar. The men wisely deemed discretion the better part of valor, and in company with their newly found escorts, started for that goal of their ambition, Petersburg. The Union troops made their way to the southern return of the earthworks, where their battle lines still held. Winfield Scott Hancock worked tirelessly to rally his men to withstand another thrust by the Confederates. Matthew Murphy's brigade moved out to reclaim some of their works, but were stopped by the fire of Weisiger and McGowan's troops. Some of the New Yorkers went into the railroad cut. Being prone in the cut, Weisiger's men threw cross ties and rails over the embankment onto the heads of the Yankees. Murphy's men pulled back from their failed attack. Irate at the state of his corps and being thrown back from his position along the railroad, Hancock ordered John Gibbon, one of his division commanders, to retake the works. Gibbon didn't realign his troops, but instead sent them forward toward the northern return of the captured earthworks. Inflating fire from the Union left halted the Union brigades, but Smith's brigade, at least part of it, secured a hold on the earthworks, led personally by Hancock. With a hold on the entrenchments, Hancock could now work on reclaiming more ground lost to Heath and Wilcox. Hancock ordered Colonel James Lynch and William Stedman to push against the rebels, still occupying the northern return. They did so and pushed all the way to the Phillips House. but Alfred Scales' brigade halted them, delivering some well-placed volleys into their ranks and forcing them back. Hancock wasn't giving up on Gibbon's troops just yet. He was aside on the battlefield with his hat in his hand, his sleeves loosened, and his horse's reins in his hands, split in two by a Confederate bullet. He urged his men to retake the ground. One soldier commented he looked more like a wild man or a soldier possessed with a restless demonic spirit than a general commanding in a good cause. He yelled to his troops, "Come on, we can beat them yet. Don't leave me, for God's sake." About then a bullet hit his horse in the neck. The animal fell forward, forcing Hancock to dismount. Quickly the horse recovered, and Hancock remounted. He went up to a staff officer and said, "Colonel, I do not care to die, but I pray God I may never leave this field." Hancock then heard musketry coming from the south. Wade Hampton's cavalry attacked the Union line still holding on to the southern return of the works. This drove the Federals to the other side of the works. A soldier named Private Robert Stewart of the 140th Pennsylvania had recovered sufficiently enough from his Gettysburg wound to return to his unit, but not to the ranks. He recounts the chaos that he saw. The rider, who was on detached service in the Adjutant General's office of the division at this time, was seated on a log at the temporary headquarters, preparing a report, which had been ordered from the several brigades, when this fusillade broke out from the rear. With the line breaking up in our front and a force of the enemy of unknown strength directly in our rear, it seemed for a few moments as if we were all in a fair way to be escorted directly to Richmond. It was a position in which, for the time, there was no rear and no place which was not swept by artillery fire or musketry or both. The punishment was too great for the Second Corps, and they broke and ran, heading east toward the Jerusalem Plank Road. One of Hancock's staff members recalled Hancock had never before had the mortification of seeing them driven and his lines and guns taken, as on this occasion, and never before had he seen his men fail to respond to the utmost when he called upon them personally for a supreme effort, nor had he ever before ridden toward the enemy, followed by a beggarly army of a few hundred stragglers who had been gathered together and pushed toward the enemy. The agony of that day never passed away from that proud soldier. Hancock partly blamed Gibbon for the debacle, and he held animosity toward Meade for not sending him reinforcements directly from Globe Tavern. But as with any battle, there is plenty of blame to go around. The Union lost 2,747 soldiers, with over 2,000 of them being taken prisoner. The Confederacy lost 814 men. The disaster for the Union at the Second Battle of Reams Station illuminated some of the weaknesses in the Army of the Potomac. Its veterans were worn out from excessive marching and fighting, and the addition of green troops into those ranks made for a disastrous combination. It also exposed the weakness of the Union line as it attempted to swing around and cut off the rail lines running into Petersburg.